Welcome, everybody, to Spirit Matters, your daily Bhakti Center podcast. My name is Dayal. I'm here with Achyuta Gopi, Kishore Chandra, and our live studio audience, or live virtual studio audience, representing from all over the world. And we're glad that you're listening with us. It's a favorite part of the day for all of us. And we're so glad that you tune in. Yesterday, we were getting a little juicy and we were getting into. Basically, we were just talking about all the comments that Achyuta Gopi gets on Instagram. And we wanted to just kind of pick up where we left off from there. What's the most recent comment, Achyuta?
Um, I don't know. I kind of spent the last couple of days a little bit detached from social media, so I wasn't even
Mm,
reading much, which is kind of
yeah,
a, good thing to try every so often.
yeah, yeah,
To
yeah,
not in it, but in it.
yeah. Refresh
Yeah,
us, Achyuta or Kishore or Achyuta. Refresh us where we left off because we were kind of, it was like 9:30 and we were like, big question came up and we're like, we're out of time. And so like, but then we're like, well, let's pick up it next tomorrow. And then I'm like, wait, where are we picking up? So refresh us where we were going and let's pick up from there. Anybody remember?
I do remember we were. Do you want to go, Kishore?
No, no, you. Yeah.
I do know we were talking about discrimination
Mm,
and how sometimes, in order to set our boundaries, especially and even in spiritual life, we have to remember our discrimination and how devotees are just people.
mm,
Uh, even spiritually advanced devotees are sometimes just people, and they happen to know about Krishna. And how do we reconcile that? What does that start to look
mm.
like in our spiritual lives and in our regular lives when we start realizing that also our parents are just people, the bosses, supervisors that you have, all the people that even we look up to or try to emulate as we look at our blueprint for life and where we want to go, are all just people kind of struggling the
Mm,
same way we are with the six senses, which include the
yeah.
mind. Everybody's going through it, and how that still doesn't excuse anybody from overstepping our boundaries,
Mm,
but also tends to give us some insight into how we can be compassionate, but not compassionate to a fault.
mm.
Yeah.
I have a big question. Um, and the question is to either of you, but I'm also looking at you, Chuti, because you were speaking, and also as somebody that has, um, as you were mentioning yesterday, you were talking about like cultural appropriation and people saying like adopting a culture that you weren't born in. You're like, I was born in this culture. I may, my body may look different than the stereotype of what you think it should, or I may have been born in a different country than you think it should, but like I was raised as a Gaudiya Vaishnav in the Bhakti movement. Like this is what who I am. Um, and so this idea of people being just people, because we also we exist and live in a tradition where I think in spiritual circles in general, we exalt people so tremendously. And we put people on pedestals, and there's this idea of the gurus or the saints or the spiritual authorities or people who represent God or people who are so elevated. And we sort of we don't look at them as just people. We look at them as something beyond, almost something worshipable. But then we have these. So I'm wondering for you, as somebody, either of you can speak to this. I think any of us can. But my question is, have you? What is a moment or moments you've experienced where you've seen that kind of crash down to reality, where somebody that put on a pedestal and um, you saw the human side of them, and then how do you work through that where it's not throwing the baby out with the bathwater? Okay, we're no longer, this person's a piece of trash, but they're not the saint that I thought they were. But it just seems like this. I think that because the context that we brought it up yesterday was sort of like this cancel culture thing where people are either like exalted saints or they're pieces of garbage and I don't want anything to do with them. And what I hear from you yesterday is like there's this very gray line of like being able to respect other people, appreciate their stories, also hold them accountable. And so it's almost kind of like this what's the word I'm thinking? Cracking of idealism, so to speak. And I'm wondering if like there's an experience that you've had in your life, or just you don't have to give details of, you don't need to drop names of anything. You know, well, by the way, this person who happens to have 500,000 followers on Instagram is not who you think they are. Um, but I'm just wondering if just to make it real and bring it home, like how have you navigated something like that, if so?
I think we all wind up experiencing it on some level, big, small, or otherwise. I feel like it's especially easy to see in spiritual cultures and in spiritual communities. There's always that fear that whichever leader head is in position will all of a sudden not be the thing that you thought that they were, will not be the saintly person that you thought they were, which doesn't necessarily have to be true, because in order to be saintly just means that you have saintly qualities. And a lot of people can still have saintly qualities, and then they can still just be people, and then still do things that you might not agree with, or that you even might consider, like, you're like, oh my God, like this is heavy for me. Um, and I think it's important to recognize that there's gonna be a huge unruly moment of cognitive dissonance. And that's basically what we are all trying to guard against, this crazy pain that we associate with this how did I invest my emotions and such into a person, a situation, a thing, and now this thing is not what I thought. And then you have this cognitive dissonance of how am I supposed to continue going on, but also, do I support this? Do I negate it? Do I do whatever? And we do have this almost like either or. There's no chill. Like there's no like middle ground for it. Either you throw it all out or you accept it all wholeheartedly, and you are this person. So one really simple way to explain it is, you have guru disciple relationships, right? And for a while, the vernacular would become, instead of asking if somebody was a disciple of someone, it's like, oh, is that person, they Narayan Maharaj? Are they like Radhanath Maharaj? And I used to like, it was like a language thing. Since a lot of this culture comes from India, a lot of the articles were kind of just removed from the sentence. But I always thought it was really poignant because I would joke with my family, like, yes, I am Radhanath Swami. It's true. But what happens is, when we really start looking up to these people, we're investing so much of ourselves. We are investing so much. And then when something happens, even, we were having that conversation with Danya, and Danya was talking about relationships. And when they break up, all of a sudden, there's a whole community of people that are like, oh no, well, how could this happen? I feel so sad about this. And you should do so and so. And it's like, whoa, we have to also know when to draw our healthy boundaries, even in spiritual life, even in community life. As deeply as I might feel for the breaking up of somebody else's relationship, or as deeply as I might feel for somebody else's spiritual dark night of the soul, that's not mine. Like,
Mm.
and my sister is always really good at definitely reminding me. She's like, no, you gotta, like, you ever have your mom tell you, like, look, it, you keep what's yours and then you leave the rest over there. Like, don't you don't have to bring anything home from anybody else's house. And I feel like that's super important to remember. Even if we looked up to somebody spiritually, and even if they were not able to hold on to that spiritual gravitas, or whatever we gave them, that importance that we gave them, does not negate our spiritual journey. It actually has nothing to do with our spiritual journey. Even if that person is your guru, once you've taken on that mantle of Krishna consciousness or bhakti yoga, that is yours now. It is yours always. And the connection that you made with the divine supremely does not change because somebody else had an issue. It's like my relationship with you, Doyle, shouldn't change if you have an issue with Kishore, or even if I have an issue with Kishore. But we do it with God all the time. Like, we do it with God all the time. It's like, God, I had a problem with this person, so I'm never speaking to you again. And God is like, whoa, I didn't do anything. We were fine. We're like, nope, that's the rules now. If I have a problem with that person randomly and not with you, I'm not talking to you anymore. And I think about how completely just distraught I would be if my people did that, if my friends did that. And so I feel like, how do we navigate this cancel culture? How do we navigate these feelings, even especially in spiritual life? It's the same way I deal with myself. I know my shortcomings. I know I may not be all that people build me up to be in their heads or in this whatever persona they've thought of me as, but I keep on going. And I don't necessarily say, oh, well, that's it for me. Lights out. But I decide that I can give myself leeway. I decide that I can give myself some compassion, or I can bend the rules if it's me. So we all give ourselves permission to do it, but then we hold others to this rigid, stringent standard that is like unbreakable. So we are all in countries with political policies that we may not agree with, but I say, whenever we come into these issues, we can think about the fact that even if we don't agree, somehow we keep on trucking from the inside. We don't just give up our citizenships and be like, you know what, I'm out. Or even if you do, okay, now that's something to think about. But the majority of us are still like, well, I'll create some change from the inside. I'll figure out a way. So if we can extend, maybe there are also people trying to create change from the inside in whatever institution, organization, spiritual community, and whatever it is. People are people, and that doesn't have to change your journey. Their issues don't have to be your issues.
People are people, so why could it be? No, no, no. What's that song? Is that those lyrics apply here? That song came to my mind.
I
Kishore,
think,
you're speaking.
yeah, I think one of the biggest misconceptions that people have about spiritual life is that everyone likes each other. I'm just gonna keep it real, real. Like
Mm,
sometimes people aren't gonna like you, and that's okay. And I think that the idea that like everyone has to like each other and get along all the time is actually really like hmm, it's actually it's hindering. What did you say, Chuta?
Cult like.
Yeah, it's cult-like. Yeah,
mm,
yeah, it's cult-like, and I was gonna say it's actually hindering to my spiritual progress because it's keeping me on the material platform essentially of like they have to like me as this material body and I have to like them as that material body. And I think for me, one of the I see it as a blessing and also as like it took me a little while to really take spiritual life seriously. But like for a lot of people who deal with I don't know what euphemism I want to use. A lot of people who deal with identities that are not the norm, let's put it that way. You already know that, you know? It's like you already know that like X, Y, and Z person is not going to like me just because of who I am. And it's like okay, you know, and it's like I can either choose to like get angry about it and get this about it and like try to fight, you know, the battle and this and etc. And I'm not saying that those battles aren't worth fighting, because I do think that, of course, there does need to be a mutual level of respect. But I think the big question that came up in my mind is like, do I have to like you or agree with you to respect you? And I think that that's a really interesting question because it's like, can I have respect for you as a soul, as a child of God, but not necessarily agree with what you're doing or not necessarily agree with, you know, your stances on certain things. And just to bring it back to a very personal level, it's like when I started coming into Krishna consciousness, I was very like at the beginning, just like asking a lot of intense questions because I came from a spiritual religious family. I came from Jehovah's Witnesses. And also this talk about culture, I think is a really interesting thing that we could go off into. Because I remember when I was like growing up, I had this moment where I was like, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. So my parents are immigrants from Ecuador. I'm here in New York. We're speaking Spanish, but we're practicing a made up sect of Christianity that was like made up by some white guy. Like, how does this all make sense? You know, like I don't understand what's going on. So I think that culture is it's such a fluid thing. And I think when we try to be the controllers and be the owners of something, it really messes with ideas of like how we're interacting with the material world, because the main concept is that actually Krishna is the owner. Actually, God is the controller, not me, right? And so, of course, I can respect different cultures and I can enter into different cultures, and we have to do it in a respectful way. But this idea of owning something, of like, this culture is mine, it's like, you know, I feel like it's a very slippery slope of self-righteousness. But anyway, back to the other point. So when I started coming into Krishna consciousness, I had all this religious trauma about, you know, sexuality and like people just not accepting from just based on who I am. And so right at the beginning, when I started entering into Krishna consciousness and bhakti, I always asked that question. I was just like, well, what about this? Well, what about this? Well, what about this? And, you know, just to put it very plainly, sometimes I did not get the answer that I wanted. You know, sometimes it wasn't all like rainbows and butterflies and just like, yes, everyone is just like, you know, everyone is accepted. And I think that that's really interesting. I'm thinking of a verse. Well, there's a couple of verses in the Bhagavad Gita, and there's a couple of sections in Bhagavad Gita that explain the qualities of someone who is enlightened, of someone who is just relishing in self-realization, where they're like seeing with these spiritual goggles and they see, you know, pebbles and stone and gold is the same, or they're seeing a Brahmin and animals and cows and elephants and dogs, all as the same, all as the same. And it's like, that's wonderful, and yes, 100%. But I think as someone who's in this material world, we have to accept like not everyone's at that level. Actually, there's a very few percentage of people, like very minuscule percentage of people that are at that level, seeing everything as equal and seeing everything as the same. And therefore, if I can accept that like there's a very small percentage, then I can accept that they're not going to see me as the same. And they're going to see me through their conditioned lenses. And in a sense, like how much I'm willing to accept that determines my level of suffering when it comes to that. It's like, if I can just accept like, hey, you're conditioned, you're not going to like me because of X, Y, and Z reason. Great. Hare Krishna, you know, Hari Bol, all respects to you. Bye. You know, I do think it's very important though to find people, and that's the thing. And I'm gonna, you know, because people pleasing is a whole nother topic. That's the thing. It's like, I do think that you have to find people and a community and like really close friends who you can be intimate and you can open up with and you can share your heart with. But it doesn't need to be everyone. It doesn't need to be like the entire community, and the entire bhakti community needs to just like accept me for who I am. I think that's a very like messed up modern notion of quote unquote equality, you know, because equality is like really what's it called, a trait of the self-realized, so of seeing with equal vision. So again, if we can accept that very little percentage of that, then equality starts to take on a different meaning. Like, what does that actually mean, you know? And so yeah, I want to hear Doyal, because I feel like I haven't heard you enough today, Doyal, but I feel like you have a lot
I,
to say.
I decided that my approach to this podcast was going to shift to just me asking you guys more questions. And that's been my strategy, and I like how it's working so far. But I do have a couple things I want to say. First of all, and I was looking up some stuff. What you guys said is beautiful. I love you guys so much, and I'm super super just inspired listening and just kind of witnessing your realizations, and also just being so real and also sharing, because I think you guys have such your journeys have been so genuine and real. And I think that we don't always, you know, they say that, you know, be kind to everybody. Everybody has a story that they're going through. Like, we're usually going through more than we share, including ourselves. And I just think, as you mentioned, just honoring, just being a Black woman in America growing up in a spiritual community, being a Latin American gay man growing up, both of you guys growing up in Queens. Did you grow up in Queens, Suchita, also, or was it Brooklyn? You grew up in, both of you guys growing up in Queens. You guys were neighbors growing up. You didn't know it. Did you know that growing up you'd eventually be on a podcast together
That's
with a
right.
white man from Orange County?
Ah,
um, And so I'm just like honoring, I appreciate you guys so much. And I think you bring so much of that authenticity through your journeys. And I think it can get missed. It can very much get missed of how much you have worked through as individuals to get to the places you are, and how much hope and how much inspiration I think that gives to a lot of people, myself included. And so I appreciate just having friends like you guys and knowing both of you, and I just thank you for this friendship and for this exchange. And I was looking up, there was a couple things I was looking up. I was looking up some verses from the Bhagavad Gita related to what you were sharing, Kishore, that I thought was really powerful, because you mentioned this seeing everybody as equal and all this thing, but then also honoring where we're at. And in the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna actually, he highlights that when he speaks to Arjuna, this idea, he uses the word adhikar, which means like qualification, or kind of like stature, where we're at. I was looking up that, and I was also looking up, I'll get to that first so that we can end with the Bhagavad Gita. I was looking up the Depeche Mode lyrics because I was thinking of that song, and Cindy put it. But I was like, do these lyrics really, do they relate, or was I just thinking of a tune? But they actually really do. And I was thinking, when we were in India, we got to meet with Danya's father, Javi Prabhu's, also known as Elon Chester, who's like a Grammy Award-winning musical celebrity in South America. He's from Venezuela, and he sings all
He
these
pretty much
beautiful.
he pretty much wrote the Venezuelan national anthem.
Wow, yeah, he's just a
Like, I don't know if you guys
superstar.
heard, but the man is like a legend.
He's a legend down there. He's a legend,
Like,
and
legit, he's legendary.
yeah, I don't really understand the gravity of it because I'm just removed from that scene. But like when I hear it, it's like, oh my God, he's a legend down in South America, um, but specifically in Venezuela. But so, anyways, he spent some time with us, and he spoke about, because he told us his spiritual story, and he said that when he sings, he always has these two big spotlights up at the top of his concert venues, and he imagines that those are the eyes of God, and he's singing all of his songs to Krishna. So he has all these love songs and etc. And they just think, oh, it's some romantic journey, but he's actually singing it to Krishna. And so sometimes it's really beautiful to like take something and like see like, what would it look like if I was singing this to Krishna, or what would this? So I was looking at this Depeche Mode song, "People Are People," and I was trying to think it related to people, and I was actually thinking exactly what you said, Achyut, of like, why does my relationship with other people need to get in the way of my relationship with Krishna? And it says, people are people, people are people. So why should it be you and I should get along so awfully? People are people, so why should it be you and I should get along so awfully? And it was just kind of like, I thought that chorus was kind of like, actually, like, imagine if Krishna is singing that song to us, like, people are people, but like, why does that have to get in the way of us? Like, we got a good thing going here, and that never has to stop or get in the way. And I think that when we look at people who exhibit spiritual qualities, Krishna outlines it in the second chapter, and in many places, he talks about in the second chapter that Arjuna asked this question, like, what are the qualities of a person who has, he says, what are the symptoms of one whose consciousness is merged in transcendence? How do they speak, and what are their language? How do they sit, and how do they walk, etc.? And then Krishna goes through all of these qualities. And I like, as you mentioned, Achyuta, and as you mentioned, Kishore, it's like, people are saintly as they exhibit certain qualities. And it's like stepping into a river of transcendence as I'm exhibiting. And sometimes when there are saintly people who are in that river, but then also sometimes people step out of that river. The river of transcendence is the same quality. As long as somebody's exhibiting behavior and character in that way, they're in that saintly status. But then as when people sometimes maybe have some human side to them, or deviation, or some step sticking their toe out of the water, then we should recognize that the water is still flowing and is of a pure spiritual stature. But sometimes people step in and out of it. And we ourselves, I mean, this is the question that I didn't get into today, but maybe we can pick it up yesterday. It's like how we ourselves navigate that, because we're all in some positions of spiritual leadership. Everybody, has somebody looking up to them. And like, how do we navigate that as human beings that like represent something to other people? We're not gurus, or we're not of any high spiritual stature, but even if it's just a mentor that you have, or people that follow you on social media, or come to your yoga class. It's like we just got back from India, taking people on pilgrimage. It's like people looking up to you in a certain way, representing a spiritual tradition. How do we live authentic lives that is true to who we are and doesn't scare people like, oh my God, you told me too much, you know? And so I just that was the conversation I wanted to get into. But the last thing that I want to mention is that, as you were sharing, Kishore, is when Krishna describes the entire nature of the soul, his first instructions in the Bhagavad Gita is like describing that you're an eternal spiritual being. That's the first set of instructions in the Bhagavad Gita in the first half of the second chapter. And then Krishna now, through the rest of the Gita, is answering the question, what do you do with that information? Like, what do you do with the understanding that you're so? How do you bring that into your life? And the first thing that he says before he gets into any of that, he says it in two places. He uses in the 31st verse, he uses this word swadharma. Swadharma api chaveksha. He says, considering your own specific duty, your own dharma, your own nature in this life. We have a nitya dharma, which is our eternal constitutional position, which is what Krishna spent the entire first half of the Bhagavad Gita explaining. Our nitya dharmas are all pretty much the same. We're eternal spirit souls beyond the material coverings. But we also have a swadharma in this life. That is our psychophysical nature. That is the operating system we exist in this world. And Krishna says, considering your swadharma, your dharma in this life, you should know that there's no better engagement for you than to fight this battle. Like, you have to see differences. Imagine if Arjuna was like, everyone's the same. You die and I'm killing. It's like, and Arjuna's stabbing his brother. It's like, what are you doing? I'm on your side. It's like, we're all the same. And he's just like, and he's not using any discretion. It's like, you have to use discretion because that's your dharma in this life. And then he says it even just 10 verses later, he uses this word adhikar. He says, karmanya I'm reading it here. Karmanya evikaraste. Considering your adhikar, you're meant to do karma in this life, action. And so he lays out like, I'm going to give you all of these instructions, but before I do, I'm just letting you know where you're at and filter that through your context of life. And I think we miss that when we read the Bhagavad Gita or other scriptures or other shastras or spiritual teachings. We don't pause and be like, okay, this is the general spiritual teaching, but then how does this filter in and apply to my specific circumstance, my psychophysical nature, where I'm at? And we just kind of whitewash and think it all applies to everybody the same without thinking like, okay, that's the teaching, but then how does that not just my nature, but like the season of my life, where I'm at right now. And we look to the left and the right and we compare. And that's why Krishna says one chapter later in the third chapter, it's better to do your own duty imperfectly than to follow another's perfectly, because like, you have your own swadharma, you have your own adhikar in this life. And it takes a lot of spiritual maturity and groundedness and security to trust in that and not feel like I need to do something else that somebody else is doing in order to feel successful in my spiritual life. It's like, this is where I'm at. This is who I am right now, materially. And this is the context in which I express and practice my spiritual life. And I just thought it was so interesting that Krishna says that right in the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita. Before he gets into anything else, he's like, wait a minute, let's take your own swadharma, your own adhikar into consideration and context and allow that to inform how we absorb everything else moving forward. And when we do that for ourselves and when we do that for other people, we have a much more developed and mature sense of spiritual life that breeds compassion, that breeds understanding, that leaves room for the grayness sometimes, and it's a lot less rigid. And so that's what I was pulling out from you guys, and that's my 2 cents.
I feel like y'all, you like, why is it at 9:30? You're like, here, let me put all these points.
I know.
All this stuff. And then you're all going to have all these points that you want to make. Up 9:30 at a time. Boop.
I know.
I got the final word, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I always like to have the last word and anything. Goodbye. See you next time. Haribo!
There are like 6 points now that I'm like, oh,
me too. But one question before we sign off that I think maybe is an interesting place to start with or start at tomorrow is this point of adhikar and swadharma is like super important. However, I think that in the past, or at least in Arjuna's case, it was kind of simple in a sense. It's like you're a Kshatriya, you're a warrior, that's who you
Mm.
are. There was the roles of society that were very clearly defined. And I've seen this point be brought up in classes before, and I've brought this point up to different classes before, different people before. And the main question that people have, and that I have still, a little less, but what is my Swadharma? Like, what is my swabhava? What is this body? What is my role in this society? Who am I, right?
Mm.
So many people I feel like are in jobs that like maybe they don't like. I get that so much from people. Like I don't like my job. I don't think this is my mission. I don't think this is where I'm supposed to be. I just did this because my parents told me to do it. I just did this because society told me to do it, but this isn't who I am. And it's like
Mm.
that journey of like how do I discover like what is actually my mission in this karmic situation that I've been born in, I feel like is an interesting place we
Mm.
can jump off from tomorrow. And I see a Chuta.
Mm. I would love to, Chuta. You got some thoughts? I have some thoughts on that. And Kimberly's like, yes, I would very much. Everyone's like, yes, yes. Tell me, tell me.
You
Guys, you
know,
can all schedule 10 minutes call with me. I'll tell you your Swadharma.
here's the thing, right? Here's the thing. And I just wanna put this out there real simple, right? Just the way you're saying, I think it was kind of simple for Arjuna. Well, what I well, what I love about it is that everybody is living the most unconventional version of whatever should have been simple. Like
Mm,
it should have been simple for Arjuna, except for there are five dudes also married to one woman, and that was an issue, right? Like he had just spent a stint as a eunuch. Like so he like for a year he was a completely different person, and then he flipped back. And so like I'm like there's we think it's simple, but there's so
mm,
much complex psychology in there. But what is simple is this, right? You're like everybody's asking what's my swadharma, like what is this thing? I dare say we know, we all know there are natural proclivities, which is what Krishna is
mm.
bringing out. What we ask is not
Mm.
what is my swadharma. What we ask is, do I have permission to follow it?
Yes.
Boom! The chat board is blowing up. Booms and yeses and wows.
Yes.
But we
That's all the
just
time we have for today, everybody. Thank you. Let's ruminate on that question, and we'll see you next week. Um, that's a
we
great
gotta
question.
That's the question. That's the
Permission.
question.
Permission. That comes up. That's a big one. Okay, we're out of time, everybody. I don't know what I'm supposed to say at this point.
Kimberly.
Kimberly, give us the takeaways before we launch into another conversation.
Honor where you are at. It's okay to not like everyone and have intimate relationships with everyone. People are just people, and that doesn't have to change your journey. Their issues don't have to affect your issues and affect your relationship with a higher power.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much, Kimberly. Thank you, Kishore and Achyuta. Bookmark these things. What I'm going to sum up so we can tomorrow is that this idea of filtering spiritual life through our own context of our swadharma and our nature in this life. How do we know what that is? And if we really know what it is, do we have permission, or how do we give ourselves permission for that? That's what we're picking up tomorrow. Please, if you guys like or appreciate our podcast, rate and review us. Go to Apple Podcasts. I don't know where else you can rate and review, but go to Apple Podcasts, rate and review. We appreciate the rating. We appreciate the review. If you'd like to join us live, please send us an email or go to bhakticenter.org or reach out to me, Dayal at bhakticenter.org, and we'll connect you to our Rise platform. You can join us Rise. We also have a full community where we have questions and discussions, and people can carry the conversation online. We'd love to be in touch with you. Thank you guys all so much, and we will be in touch again soon. Bye-bye.